evening, everybody, and welcome to episode 4 of Deep Dive December with the Impact Marathons. It's been amazing so far to give you guys an opportunity to see behind the curtains of how we put on Impact Marathon. And few people have had an opportunity to see that more than Tyler McMahon, the head of Smart Pani. Now, Smart Pani is an amazing social enterprise in Nepal that we've been working with for the last 4 years there, who have sponsored our race. They've helped us install water filtration systems into schools, and they've been an amazing part of the Impact Marathon journey and great friends throughout. Tyler himself is a mountain biker, but also a really keen runner. In fact, he runs our race every year with his dog, Mia, who is a really good runner and a great character. This conversation is a great insight into the importance of water in Nepal, the importance of water worldwide as well. We talk about it from a global level as well, and how we can use what is around us in order to maximize the amount of water that we maximize the usage of the water that we have as well. So please, this is quite a long episode and very, very wide ranging. So I hope you really enjoy it. And I know that there'll be a lot of different nuggets and insights. Every time I talk to Tyler, I learn a lot of new things and go off researching long into night on stuff that I didn't realize and didn't know. So enjoy the conversation. And very much hope to see you on episode 5 when we have an amazing guest. So, I mean, it's a really good place to start and kind of like delve into what we want to talk about today, which is obviously like the work that you've done over. How many years have you been living in Nepal now?
Been there 12. So Smart Pani is 9+ years old now.
And you spent 3 years in Nepal before you set up Smart Pani. And I guess it'd be really helpful to just start off with, when we talk about water, particularly most of the people that tune in, that follow Impact, everyone has an idea that water is important, but it's not a pressing concern in a day-to-day life, right? We all understand the importance of water. We live it in our houses, but it's not something we ever think about in a conscious way, in the way that it needs to be in Nepal, but also in the way that potentially we all need to actually do think about it in a conscious way for the future of the planet. So I wanted to just kick off a little bit with just asking you about that, the importance, we've got this global goal 6, clean water and sanitation, and the importance of that in a general way, but also, and I guess moving into there, the importance of it in particular in Nepal and why it is that you began to focus into Nepal.
I mean, I've always been a water guy because I'm from Colorado, and a lot of people wouldn't know Colorado is basically a desert. And we're kind of like the water towers of the Western U.S. So Colorado's in court with all these other states over water rights. And I've been hearing about that since I was 6, 7. I remember one city was trying to take my town's water, and there was this huge parade, and it showed a picture of a cowboy peeing on the ground and says, "Pump this out of Park County, Aurora." So water's always been, as one of my professors said, on my brain, because it's a huge issue, and it does determine. I mean, what a lot of people don't know is that water, the majority of global water use is actually agriculture into food. And I think when you have a shortage of water, it impacts everything: food, industry, power, and then day-to-day use. But then day-to-day use is where it's changing, because you're starting to see in developing countries, you've always seen water shortages. You have a lot of people without any access to water, including in Nepal, despite it being the Himalayas. People have to walk 3 hours a day to get water in a lot of cases. But you're also starting to see a huge amount of water pollution. You hear now about the microplastics in water, but you have chemicals that are showing up all over the place. The PFAS, the forever chemical that you get in a Teflon? I mean, they found that all over the world. And water is going to be a growing issue. We're becoming a lot more efficient with it, which is good. I'm sure the UK has a similar standard, but I think the US we were extremely inefficient, but I think we've actually managed to continue to grow the economy, population, everything, and use even less water over the past 50 years, which is good. Long way to go. And I think that's becoming more and more true. But I think everybody needs to have a conscious about it. and not just the water you use on a day-to-day basis, but also the water you eat or the
what are the key ways that, so when you say that it becomes more efficient on a macro scale in America, what are the key ways that America has been able to lower the amount of water whilst the economy still grows?
So one, I think, is efficiency in agriculture, I think is one. Two is efficiency in cities in general. And you'll see this like household level water use, less water use for landscaping, mandating lower flow toilets again and again, and then innovating around lower flow shower heads, that same level of water pressure with 1/3 the water, all those type of things, and just step by step. So the same household that was using absurd amounts, like some 2.5 times what the UK is, which is still double what the average urban population, say Nepal, uses. The average wealthy urban population has actually cut itself in half. And I think some of the Western cities in the US that used 50% of their water on landscaping have now cut down. So they're at almost 150 liters per capita a day because of these technologies and things. There's still a long way to go. And Britain's over there around that 150. And I think there's a lot of efficiency improvement there too. But you see the reverse in Nepal, a lot of water being, in the wealthy urban areas, a lot of water being wasted unnecessary. So it's kind of that whole, we lose the again, and there's a balance in the middle. Not everybody, you don't have to just go be inefficient and then be efficient again, you can just stick in the middle. So I think there's a lot of opportunities around.
So how did you end up? I mean, you said that through your early years and from Colorado and all of that, water's been a key part of what's on your head, in your brain, and so how did your story kind of start into being such a leading figure in the water industry, but also how that path led to Nepal?
Yeah, so when I was in college, I decided to study economics, and I took a course, environmental economics, and it was about the water resource policy of Colorado, the whole Colorado River, from Colorado all the way down to Mexico. And that is an incredibly complicated river. Basically, there's a certain amount of water that's been allocated between each states, and that was allocated during a wet year, a wet decade. It was based on a wet decade average. So there's never been that much water. So the river never reaches Mexico, ever, in the past decades. And so I got to take that class, and I found it fascinating about how the economics, water right markets, conservation. And then the next year I went to study abroad in Nepal. And I started looking at the water issues of Kathmandu. And there was a lot of parallels. Kathmandu, surprisingly, is one of the few places in Nepal that doesn't have a good supply of snowmelt fed water. It's all fed by rain, basically. Even the stuff that comes out of the park, the impact course was around, that's all rain fed. There's no snow, right? So Kathmandu has a big water shortage, and it has. So they're doing the same thing we've done in the US, or in the Western US, is dig a pipeline from where there is water and snow and to a place where there isn't. And they've been digging that for like 30 years. So that's what I did my research project on. Sorry, not digging it for 30 years. That's a bad phrase. They didn't actually start digging it until 10 years ago. They've been talking about, promising digging it for 30 years.
How close is that to completion now? I mean, I remember landing there, and actually some of the people who ran our first marathon there was a Romanian chap who was working up on the pipeline from Malemci, and
really?
He came and got involved, came to the office like, I really want to be part of this race. And it's actually he will never know how important a role he played in Impact Marathon, because he came in, he was like, I want to be part of the race. I want to do the whole week. He paid us in cash. It was like $800 in cash to do everything with us. And then a couple of days before the race week, he said, I've injured my leg, I can't come, but I love what you do. So keep the money and consider it a donation. And you know what, in that first year, that kind of pay it forward act of kindness,
I mean, it still to this day blows my mind that he did that, and it really rescued us that first year because we were right at the margins. But so that's my connection with the Melenchi pipeline. I'm always grateful for the fact it still took 30 years because it came really helpful. But how close is it to finishing? And what do you think that solves a lot of the problems in Kathmandu, or do you think it's going to get caught in some of the natural challenges that Nepal faces when it comes to planning these sorts of things?
So what's interesting about Kathmandu is that the amount of rain that actually falls on the buildings and roads is more than the city would need in a year, but it falls in like 4 months. But because they're paving the surfaces, that rain all runs down the river and goes to India eventually, whereas it used to go into the ground through the rice paddies, and everybody would get their water from their well, like literally 5 feet deep. You dig and you get water 5 feet deep. But when they were deciding how to deal with Kathmandu's growth, managing that was considered, but instead they chose this Melamchi project. And this is like the 1970s, 1980s time, early 1980s. And some people pushed back then, but not really. So what happened is Kathmandu right now has a daily water demand of approaching roughly 400 million liters per day, right? And the water supply, if I'm being generous, excluding leakages, which are a bigger problem, is 90 million during the dry season and maybe 150 million during the wet season. So Melamchi's going to bring 170 million liters in the first phase. So you can do the math. It doesn't solve the problem. Helps, but it doesn't solve it. Their plan is then to dig another pipeline to another river and connect it to Melamchi, and then another pipeline and connect it to that river, and then connect it to the Melamchi. And that will bring a total of 540 million liters between 3 phases. And if they implement demand management and a few other things, they may solve the problem by 2030.
And how is the problem like? So for those of people who've never visited Nepal, or when they did, they stayed in a hotel which had taps with, how does the water shortage manifest itself in the day-to-day life of Nepalis?
I mean, some people shockingly have 24-hour, 7-day-a-week supply of water. So it's very unequal distribution. Or, you have connections and you do it. But like in my apartment, I think my landlord's lucky if the water shows up once a week, usually once every 2 weeks. So typically people have a big tank underground, 4,000 liters, 10,000 liters, 12,000 liters. Pretty much every house that's not part of a fancy colony that has their own centralized deep well that's been built since 2000 has a 10,000 liter tank built as part of it on the ground to collect that intermittent water. Like I used to stay with the homestay family. I still visit them, and that was 2006. And the water there would come once every 4 days. It wasn't great quality water. Within 5 to 7 years, it went to not even coming once every 2 weeks, and significantly worse quality water. And now I'm not even sure it comes.
What do you mean by quality water there? I mean,
you can one is you definitely can't drink the tap water in Kathmandu. I mean, you can get lucky. Maybe 50% of the tap water is actually clean, they've found, but then you have in-pipe contamination within your own house as well. Because of the storage systems required to manage the intermittent water. The second you start storing water, it easily gets contaminated. But two, the municipal water, one way they've been managing the shortage is groundwater. And Kathmandu's groundwater is some of the worst groundwater I've heard of. I mean, it doesn't have arsenic in it, but it has levels of ammonia, nitrates, and iron that are, you tell somebody in the US, they just go, poof.
Is that to do with the geology of the area, or is that to do with other pollutants or the way they've constructed the city?
It's a mix. The deep wells having that much ammonia and nitrate in it is all historical geology. Nobody actually knows for sure. Some people think that it's fossilized carbon from centuries ago, because Kathmandu lies on what used to be a lake bed. So that's just decomposed, and it's releasing that stuff. But in the shallow water, it is a little bit of contamination from fertilizers, a little bit of geology, so a lot of iron and manganese in the soil, and then some pollution from broken sewage lines, broken septic tanks, leaking septic tanks, etc. So yeah, you can see that the municipality has complicated filter systems to deal with it, but you can still see visibly that they can't deal with everything. So you get some water that comes out of the tap that's yellow from the government. Not very often. It's better than the groundwater you manage yourself. It's quite expensive to filter that groundwater.
If we take that back, you said that you landed in Kathmandu with a year abroad study program. So we've headed off in a different direction. I thought, because we're going to do that a lot today. I know, but go back to that story. How do we get to the point where you ended up staying in Kathmandu for all these years?
So I did my independent research project on the Malamshi, and I was kind of looking at small scale alternatives. And I met an organization, Nepal Water Conservation Foundation. One of their their founders, Deepak Diwali, he told me, actually, if you catch 3% of the rain that falls within the valley, it'll give you more water than Malamshi. And I went back to the US after my semester, and I had really enjoyed Nepal. I enjoyed what I did in the US too. I almost ended up with a career there. But I put that quote of that 3% into a proposal to look into the economics of it and apply for a Fulbright scholarship from the US government. And I won that to go back. So I got to go back for 10 months and spend 10 months researching that. And then I fell in love with the country, decided I wanted to do something. Went back for 2 months to watch some of my good mountain bike friends compete in the Asian Mountain Bike Championships, because it was kind of an honor to have the Asian Mountain Bike Championships in Nepal. Started dating my now wife.
Wow.
And then I got a job working for the UN for a couple of years, doing sustainability stuff along with some other things. So I got to kind of put these things in practice, do a little bit of rainwater collection within their buildings, solar power, a few other things while I was there. And between my research on the economics of it, I found that the collection of rainwater and the utilization of it was one of the more cost-effective alternatives for a decent part of the population. And they could be able to pay for that with a fairly good return on their investment. Like you're talking, you put in a rainwater collection system, and the water shortage is so bad that a very large part of the population has to literally get their water delivered in trucks every week or 2 weeks, the whole year round. So if you're collecting rainwater for 6 months, you can stop buying trucks for 6 months, right? And that's a lot of money. So I always had this sort of thing that there needs to be a business. And I knew a few technicians who were kind of doing it freelance. So while I was working for the UN, I knew I was eventually going to leave. Not a big systems type person. And I started talking to them, and then I started doing a little bit of side consultancy for a hotel to turn it into a eco hotel. That was the plan. The famous Summit Hotel, actually.
Oh yes, yes, with Robin and Wendy.
Yeah, but that's gone now. Unfortunately, Summit Hotel shut down. I don't know if you know that.
I did not know that.
I was doing this.
I didn't know that.
Yeah,
is that because of the pandemic or for other reasons?
A mix, I think.
Yeah,
it's a mix. I haven't gotten the full story yet. There's a chance it reopens, but the guy, the richest guy in Nepal, bought it maybe 2 years ago. Part of his big hotel expansion. He wasn't supposed to, but he did. I guess the original owners didn't want, but he did. But the project we were working on was to do rainwater collection, water recycling, and revamp the hotel in a traditionally acceptable but eco-friendly way. So while doing that, I said, you know what, I'm going to start something. And I had 3 technicians who I knew, and I joined Toastmasters. And that's where I met my business partner, Suman. And about maybe 7 months into being in Toastmasters. So this is around March 2011. I was getting ready to leave the UN. I was still there, but not full-time at all. It's very part-time. And what I said was, I just said, can I present my business idea at one of these meetings? Is that allowed in Toastmasters? And they said, sure, of course it's allowed, but what is it? And I explained it to him. I said, this percentage of the population buys water. If they just harvested rainwater, they could do this. And there's a few other technologies, water filters that you can add, etc. And he said, oh, that's interesting. I'm building a house, and my plan was to buy water trucks year round. He said, but I have a well. It's really dirty. Maybe we could do something. So we put in a system where all the rainwater is collected, filtered, put in a tank. The overflow rainwater is put back in that well, and water is available 10 feet below the ground. It's dirty, but the rainwater helps clean it up a little bit. And then we filter that during the dry season. And he hasn't bought a single truck in 10 years.
And so where's the break-even point there? If I'm building a house and I put in a rainwater harvesting system, a simple one, nothing too complex like this guy just had. How quickly would I be saving money from not purchasing the water trucks?
His system paid back in 2.5 years.
That's pretty good when you talk about how long you live in a house for. Exactly.
It's pretty good when you talk about the fact that your housing loan is 15, 20 years. You pay back that rainwater system in 2.5 years. That means this system was about $1,000 because it was rainwater, putting it back in the ground and refiltering it again. So it was a bit more, but rainwater in a new system costs $400 or $500 really. So that'll pay back a house in a year, 2 years. And then all of a sudden you're saving that every 2 years. That's not small. It's true for government schools too. We've done a lot of government schools where their system pays back in 2 to 3 years. So imagine how much money they have that they were buying water before that they can use for education now. So it's not a small opportunity.
No, not at all. And so you did this refit, and from there, Smart Pani was born. Or was there more stress and worry and fear? Or, most of the guys that we've talked to so far have all been people who sort of been working with charities and this sort of thing. But, you're the first person we've talked to where it was like, okay, I see a business opportunity here that also fills a social need. And not only does it fill the social need, it can create exponential social impact in the grander scheme of things.
We started it that September, actually, was when we formally launched. The 3 technicians who were business partners at the time, one still is, they also had their own independent clients as well. So by combining, we had a decent base to start the business. And the first 2 years went pretty smoothly. A lot of people thought we couldn't do it. One guy said, I don't know. I doubt it. He was a water expert. I doubt it. It's a nice idea, but come back when you have done 50 installations. So we came back when we'd done 100, and he didn't even think we'd have done 50 at that point. And it was good. I think we hit some roadblocks around 2014. One with a bit of a business partner thing that I don't really talk about, like a bit of a split. But the other thing is more the growth phase, that's your sort of the valley of death, as they call it, right?
Yeah.
We're kind of stuck there. But we basically built ourselves to go bigger and expand. And I think fitting in the right human resources, making sure you match the revenue. People think the only thing we do is rainwater collection, but as you know very well, we do a lot, as much or more water filtration. That's the work we've done with you guys in schools and things like that. The people thought we did only rainwater, so sometimes...
Ironically, I actually didn't realize you did rainwater so much. I always thought you were IC as a filtration company. So ironically, I'm from the other side of the coin there, and learning more about rainwater harvesting is interesting.
Exactly. So, but the filter stuff, it's kind of our... it's our important sort of year-round sort of business, whereas rainwater is kind of the monsoon, but it's the environmental sustainability part. And we also do wastewater recycling. So we've done a few eco resorts and houses and things like that are completely water independent, recycle their water, etc.
So wastewater, how does that work?
So you take like your shower water and your laundry water, and it comes down. It has to be separate by law in Nepal because you have to have a septic tank for your toilet water. Not everybody does that, but technically your rainwater drainage is supposed to be one pipe, your gray water drainage is supposed to be one pipe, and your toilet water drainage is supposed to be one pipe. So shower water and laundry water are not very hard to clean, right? So you can clean them using a biological filtration system and then reuse them in, say, the toilet or landscaping or the garden, landscaping is garden, or car washing if you have a vehicle, right? So it's fairly simple setup, and it requires a little bit of maintenance, but not much. And you put that in, and it cuts your water demand by, say, 30%. And if you're buying water trucks or pumping water from a deep well with expensive filtration equipment, then it has a good payback too. We don't do a lot of those, but we do quite a few.
When you set up, was there any other organizations in Nepal doing similar work? Was this a tried and tested model, or was this something where you looked abroad and saw inspiration?
Definitely didn't look abroad. There was an NGO who you guys know, Enfo, who had pioneered a lot of the technologies. Yeah. I did a lot of research with them and with other umbrella organizations when I was on my Fulbright. And it turns out there was a private contractor who had just started doing other things. He mostly had built wastewater treatment systems, but ends up that he launched formally as a similar business around the same time as we did. But other than that, there wasn't really anybody. There were a lot of nonprofits working on water in general. And they were doing a lot of good work around awareness. But the thing is, when you're a nonprofit, it's harder to invest in the maintenance and follow up of these systems. And for example, I saw a school that was a private school that had paid for somewhat a rainwater system from one of these organizations. And that stopped them from having to buy water for 6 months. And the cost of a truck of water was around 1,200 rupees at that time, which was around $20 right now at the time. And their system had been inactive for almost a year when I went and visited it on my Fulbright, because one pipe had broken. And the cost of one pipe is less than $20. And that was not uncommon, right? And they didn't know where to go. And they all also wanted to have private entrepreneurs doing these things. I just think that when you have development agencies working on this, we want private entrepreneurs versus knowing what that takes was a little bit of a challenge, I think. But they had trained the technicians who I partnered with as well. So that was a good thing. Mm-hmm. So we built a business together to address those issues. The fact that there was not follow-up, and there was a big need for it within the private communities, businesses, middle income houses, private schools, industries. They all needed this technology because they all spent a lot of money on water. And then what we thought was we could take working with that sector and the maintenance team that we build up, and also provide similar level of services to government schools and low-income communities, etc. Because it's not like they don't need the maintenance and follow-up and everything like that. They actually really appreciate them when they get it. So that's kind of how we evolved.
And you, Nepal is notoriously challenging for foreign business owners and this sort of thing. How challenging has that been? How has it been to grow a business in Nepal as a foreign business leader?
Very. I'm married to a Nepali, so that helps.
Yeah.
But I am going through the foreign investment process right now. We did raise scale-up funds, and we'll be officially a foreign-owned business instead of a Nepali-owned business, partially foreign-owned. Right? I'll be an official shareholder instead of an advisor to my wife's company. And that process has been painful because Nepal's law has changed massively in the past 3 years, and now they require a minimum $500,000 of investment. which, as you can imagine, is an unpalatable amount for a social enterprise. And we don't even know if we need that much. So we have to now redo a lot of our business plan and think about how to be creative with that need and grow, because that law has changed and it's put off a bit of our scale and the finalization of investment for now going on a year and a half, maybe even 2 years since I signed the initial term sheet for an amount that was much less than that. But then the other part is, as a foreigner, fortunately, because I speak very fluent Nepali and I'm a son-in-law, it makes it easier. So I don't have those issues. Like with my staff, there's not a single staff member who looks at me as a foreigner in such a way that they either have that unnecessary reverence. A lot of people revere the foreigners, or they feel that foreigners are inferior and why are they telling us what to do? Because I've been there now, 12 plus years. So it's almost third of my life, right? And I know the culture, I know everything. So that part is easy. But I think there's still that outside of my staff that he's a foreigner and he must know better. And I've never been comfortable with that. I think that's a bigger challenge for me, because I'm promoting mostly Nepal made, or, like the sand filter we use is kind of international design, but it's not designed as some fancy international US filter, designed for these type of conditions. And we've modified it a lot. And almost every technology we've developed in Nepal using mostly Nepali expertise.
Amazing.
We do import 1 or 2 filters, but that's just because they're slightly better. But we set up the service chain, and every other part is Nepal made. So that's kind of where I sit on that. I as a foreigner, as I said, I'm uncomfortable with that. The foreigner must be the expert.
How do you break that down? What are the tactics you've built to sort of to help break that barrier down?
Yeah. So in Smart Bunny as a whole, I'm the only foreigner at all. I have a friend who helps out a bit. He's also married in Nepali. He helps out on the technical side occasionally. But that's just because I want his more creative thinking. He mostly just mentors the engineers. But other than that, it's all Nepali led, all the face. And 2 is I stop presenting myself as an expert unless I genuinely feel that I have learned something. Or say, for example, something we do in the West now, there was something we learned out of failing a lot. Like, for example, what's called green infrastructure, which includes rainwater collection, but it's basically having porous surfaces that absorb rainwater and allow it to soak back into the soil. That's something that I know you're doing in the UK, America's doing, a lot of European countries are doing, because they realize the traditional model was not very economical. But this is only a last 1.5 decade sort of thing. So the only time I go, hey, over there we're doing it better, is because I see Nepal following the old model, not the new model, right? And I say, but Nepal's a flood-prone country with extremely intense storms. Perhaps the traditional sewer model, which isn't working anyway, is not something you want to follow. You don't need to follow the same path. So that would be only one, the example. Otherwise, I try to avoid it. And I also try to help my Nepali colleagues recognize, I think, when another foreigner, for example, is just a charlatan. You get a lot of those. Somebody who comes in, maybe they're retired, maybe they're this, they're like, I can raise money, I have this idea, my idea is great, Nepalis need to fix this, Nepalis need to fix that, and you're like, but everything we do in the West is not perfect, and I think we need to learn from that. So, I mean, we've had that, and because I run a Nepali company, I've been on the receiving end of that a couple times, and I think that's something that you have to balance as foreigners when you're entering a country.
It's interesting because when in that first year of Impact, when we worked in Nepal, we linked up with some of the team at the UN, Jimmy Oostrom, Stina, and what's fascinating is how in that first year there was undoubtedly Nepalis bought into Impact Marathon really quickly. It was actually a lot of the people like yourself who've been there a lot of years who were pretty not standoffish, supportive, but not all in, not in a big way. And when you say that, it connects a dot for me, looking backwards. And I recently met up, and Jimmy Oostrom is someone huge in trail running in Nepal, also works at UNICEF UNDP in Kathmandu, and he was in London this summer, and we met up and had a few beers, and he said similar. It's like you know that first year. You don't know how much that you're going to listen and take on board, and the reason why that they've grown more and more supportive to the point where the race is very much driven by people like yourself and Jimmy and Stina is because we've taken that step back and we've tried to control certain things, but we've also tried to completely respond to certain things.
Exactly.
No matter what Jimmy and Stina said, we never took out Hell Hill at the end of the race. And I'm sure that everyone will be happy when the race moves to Patassi in the future and we don't have Hell Hill there. But pretty much everything else.
Hills.
Much bigger hills. Be careful what you wish for. But certainly there's so many things where it was really conscious. I was really conscious that if we want to put on something that is driven by Nepalis, and it's driven, more specifically, if it's driven for Nepalis, then it should be driven by Nepalis. Starting out is hard because it's a new concept, as yours was. At the time, these are new concepts, and actually, it takes time. And then the more you really want to just stand back and get out of the way, which is, I guess, is where you're getting to now. I mean, you are now in Colorado at the moment for 3-4 months, but Smart Pani, I assume, as much as it's possible during this time, is progressing and the team are working harder and all of these things are happening, and you're the other side of the globe. How's that working?
Yeah, that's just to go back, Jimmy's one of the few foreigners, and Stina both have been in Nepal such a long time and worked for the UN and ground the UN there. So I have huge respect for both of them. But how that works for me is it took a few years. And I think it was that balance. I mean, I took a risk to start Smart Pani, with 2.5 years of working experience in the UN, which is not exactly, hey, you're going to learn what to do in business, right? And I think in the first 4 to 5 years, I trusted some people too much and didn't trust people enough, and had a lot of back and forth, also other things. And the key for me was finding somebody who's like a number 1A. Like my business partner, he's very good and very knowledgeable and has been the key to a lot of Smart Pani's growth in the beginning, especially, and helped me learn and become the company leader. He's a serial entrepreneur and has multiple companies. So he's not going to be the CEO of Smart Pani as he's running 3 different things. So I was doing that for a while. But then in 2015, I hired a couple of people who you've met. And as you know very well, Anisha, she's now the COO of Smart Pani. She's been promoted to the COO of Smart Pani. And she basically runs it like a CEO. I mean, she tells me what to do all the time. And she's excellent. She bought into the vision of the company and put her own touch on it. She comes from a completely different background. She's a telecoms marketer and engineer, right? She worked for Airtel in India. But she has that intensity and drive. And it was a stroke of luck that we hired her. I think I was in the US and we had been applying and we were supposed to hire somebody else. And her resume was sitting in the pile, but somehow they missed it. And her now husband is my wife's best friend's cousin. And so all of a sudden I get an email from his brother who runs a recycling company in Nepal. And I'd already, and he was at that time also working with my wife on what she does. And he is like, my soon-to-be sister-in-law has applied to Smart Money. And she's not received a reply. And I kind of just said, I don't do the family thing, right? And then she wrote me. And the email was impressive. Like, it's something you don't often get. Like what I do, why I want to work there, what I like about the company. So I forwarded along and said, how have we not seen the CV? And my business partner someone said, I don't know how we haven't seen the CV. And then we found it, and he called her in, but we had already said we'd hire somebody else. And then a stroke of luck, that person didn't show up on her first day and said, I've actually been offered a promotion at my other job, and I'm going to stay there. Huh. So we called her up and hired her. And I think I didn't know how to deal with having somebody of her capacity. I was trusting somebody else, so I trusted in the company to integrate her. But he was doing a decent job, but he didn't quite also know how to, give her the level of work she wanted. She wanted more work, mm-hmm. right? More opportunities. And she offhand mentioned that to my business partner, and he told me. So I said, all right, and just threw everything I could at her. And she took it and took more. And then the other person who I trusted, who was our operations manager, decided to change his career at the time. And she took on 60% of his tasks. So I found somebody who is capable of driving the company better than I am in a lot of ways, and allowing me to focus on what I do, the value, now fundraising, strategy, research, different things, and running it day to day, and keeping in mind the core tenets that, we're a company that provides a sustainable water management solution. Our solutions are long-term, and we need to provide after-sales service to everybody. Like, whether it's a government school, whether it's, a wealthy client, they all need to get called every year, no matter whether they have a contract or not. And that is what's going to distinguish us. And she's bought into that and gone beyond the level of dedication. So that allows me to be here. And right now, all the marketing and management work in Smart Pony is remote anyway, because it's work from home. I mean, the technical team is working, but their work is outside. So it's relatively safe. So me being in Colorado, I've done it every couple of years. I come back for 3-4 months and nothing goes. But now it actually is, it's a good time. It's allowing me to refocus a bit personally. And also I need to fundraise, as I mentioned earlier. And I'm designing some cool new research projects around larger scale sustainable rainwater management things with an organization here that has the economic and stuff, and seeing if we can do the research in Nepal and understand the role that traditional water systems actually played in this, and the knowledge, and kind of economically value the knowledge that people are trying to pave over, and say, hey, this actually has economic value in a modern system. So I get to focus on these things. And from the day-to-day operations, I've also been able to learn that as a CEO, you check in with your staff, 1 hour a day, you're around, you have your important meetings, but you don't need to be present on the day-to-day thumb of everything 8 hours a day. And I think that was tough for me to do. And I think this is helping me learn not to do that as well, which I think is nice.
Well, I mean, the time zones alone must be pretty crazy from Colorado to Kathmandu.
Well, good thing it's 12 hours. So I can easily jump on the morning call at 8 at night, 12:45 actually. So 8:15 at night, I jump on morning call, stick around for another hour.
Just a quick question. Why is it that Nepal is 15 minutes different to a top of the hour time zone? So for everyone who doesn't know, Nepal is well, from GMT is 4 3/4 hours ahead of GMT, I believe. And it's one of those wonderful things. And I'm sure 13 years into living in Nepal, there must still be things that come up. And you're like, I don't get it. I don't understand.
I don't know. I heard from multiple people that it was just because Nepal didn't want to be the same as India.
That's the story I've heard. But it still doesn't feel like.
I think I said that to my wife, and she's like, "No, that's not it." I don't know. Nobody actually knows what it actually is, because there's no actual sense.
I was certain you
It's
would have
great.
the answer.
Like, India's on both sides of Nepal, so like the time zone. But I mean, it's fine.
You know what though? 5 years now, 5 years working in Nepal. Whenever I'm thinking about calling ahead, or whether if I'm living there trying to work out, I cannot. I know it sounds simple. Just take 5 hours and minus 15 minutes, but I can never work it out in my head what the time zones will be. I've given up trying now. It's like for some reason the brain can only compute time zones on the hour periods. Once you take off 15 minutes, it suddenly my brain combusts.
Tricky.
I can't do it.
I like the world clock app on the phone, like I'll just put it there. I'll go to London, Kathmandu, Amsterdam, Nepal. I got to have a 4-way call.
Yeah.
Try to do the math. I'm a numbers guy, so it's kind of fun.
I came across a really fun app on that Moleskine, the notebook company.
Yeah.
They've built an app called Overlap, which is basically like a visual thing that you can put in all the time zones you need in a meeting, and it's a slider, and it will all go green when it's in an appropriate time that they, because they've had the same problem trying to do it. So they built one in-house and they've now released it onto the App Store. Great little bit of kit.
I need to go get a Moleskine anyway, because I used to really like carrying around a Moleskine in my pocket to keep some notes and stuff. I'm bad at notes. I used to be really good at it. That's why you and I have been talking Rocketbook.
Yes, got one. I've got mine here. Yeah, there it is.
Great. I'm getting used to it again.
Got my notes on it here. It's
nice.
Good. As long as you don't. One day I was doing a late night assignment because I'm studying my master's at the moment, and I was doing it. It was late night, and I had a whiskey with a bit of an ice cube in it, and I pulled it over, went to drink it, and obviously the condensation then dripped onto the page of the Rocketbook, and that.
Bye.
Yeah, I had to redo those notes.
I have a coffee stain on mine from either in the office or I can't remember where. There's a coffee
Have you ever
stain.
been caught in a rainstorm with it? That's something that I'm concerned about. If I'm in Nepal for monsoon season, I've got a Rocketbook in my running pack, going out on a course. I'm worried about that.
So I was bad with my Rocketbook in Nepal, so I actually just kind of left it in my office. Unfortunately, never really traveled with it to get caught in a rainstorm. But I would probably just keep it in my laptop case, so that I think if you're gonna get it wet enough to wash away the ink on your Rocketbook, you're gonna damage your laptop. So might as well protect it like you would your laptop. But yeah, that is there. I think the cover helps with that.
Yeah, I think there'll be people on here who don't have a clue what we're talking about. Maybe they got Moleskine, but Rocketbook suddenly, what is that? It's basically plastic coated, I believe, plastic coated papers. And then it's basically a whiteboard that's a Rocketbook. So once you're done, once I've finished this conversation with Tyler, I put a bit of water on, wipe it off, and it's gone. Before that, if I wanted to keep it, it's got QR codes in the corner. You just take a screenshot and it gets uploaded to Google Drive or Microsoft OneNote, wherever you keep your things in there, and you wipe it clean, and you suddenly, you just have to carry around one notebook. And I was thinking about when I head back out with Impact, I've got my Impact notebooks, I've got my general of the book I'm writing, I've got the master. So all of these, I'm like, how am I going to take all of these notebooks? And then turns out Rocketbook I'm still not 100% convinced, but I'm about 90% there of it being the answer.
Yeah, it's interesting. It also, I think it has a tool. At one point, they were attempting to transcribe your notes for you.
They're still doing that, but my notes make no sense once transcribed.
Yeah, same. I remember forwarding along the diagram on each of that I made on Smart Money as a strategy. Like the picture, Tyler's made a diagram because I like making diagrams. I send it along, and there's a second attachment. I didn't even pay attention to it. She opens up, she's like, "What is this? This makes no sense." And then she realized it was them trying to translate my handwriting. It was horrifying.
Yeah, no, I've definitely, I've got it doing it automatically at the beginning. I was like, oh no, that seems like a good idea, right? Transcribing your handwriting, but especially with notebooks, if you're someone who, like me, I have arrows going off everywhere. That one is a dream a bit too far for now, but also something that when Bethany, who's head of operations at Impact, when she asked me about what happens if you get caught in a rainstorm, or what happens if you're on a run and you've got notebooks. We make a lot of notes as we check the courses and you're sweating. And I was like, well, if I've got a paper notebook and I'm caught in a monsoon or I sweat too much, we've got the same problem, really. You lose all your notes. At least this one, you can quickly save your notes before you go out. Or as it rains, quickly take a picture of everything. But great system. I mean, I think you've talked a few times, we started talking, you started with rainwater harvesting systems, and you talked about how you've transitioned a lot of the technology to be accessible for schools, for public schools, for low-income households. How have you done that? Is that something that is a strong line of revenue for you? What's the process of starting that and tapping into, again, we go back to the Nepali bureaucracy and the challenges that you face, tapping into government funding in order to do this? How do you convince any school which has, already got tight budgets of the need for what you're doing?
So I think it varies on the technology, and it varies on the school and their need. I think with say a rainwater harvesting system in Kathmandu for a government school, we target the schools that are spending a lot every month on water, so they see the savings. But typically we usually get it funded by a third-party company. And then what the school does is they fund part of it and the maintenance. So we know the system is going to work. And the maintenance is significantly less than the operation cost that they're saving by having it, right? Whereas in a rural area, schools do see the value of water filtration. They started to, really. And our filters, as you know, are quite easy to use. So it's the same filter we install in a house in Kathmandu, but this just provides water via gravity and removes basically all the stuff that can get children sick, and requires almost no replacement parts. So what we do is we usually get the school to contribute in kind, like labor and say drinking water taps or hand washing taps, separate things like that. I think in your school they built the hand washing station.
Yes. Yeah.
And platform to elevate the filter. And they're maintaining it well. The system does well. We spoke to the principal 2 days ago as well, and he says the system is working fine. I think we'll go out and check it. We have quite a few schools in that area. But what they see in the value is that in that school, and I've heard it from a couple other schools as well, is there's actually an attendance increase because the families see the water filter. It wasn't that school. That school, he said, the attendance increase.
You mentioned this to me when you were reporting back on that school that we worked on in the 2018 Impact Marathon in Nepal. Why for me, even though I've lived out there a long time and all of these things, it's still, I can't get my head around why is it that a family would send their child to school because of clean water. Because I think it's because it's such a, you would never send your child to school without water here in the UK. So this idea that, how does that increase attendance? Surely there's I couldn't quite work out what the catalyst to that is.
So I think there are a few things that drive attendance in schools. One is the fact that Nepal is, as a country, doing fairly well in increasing the attendance of children in schools in general. Having a midday meal is something that a lot of schools increase attendance because they get food, right? Yeah. You go to school, you get food. So I think it's even the same with water. Like if you don't have a good water source, it's not clean, you have to walk for water. If your kid can go to school and have a couple liters of clean drinking water, maybe even bring a liter home or something like that, then that I think is what drives it. Because I've heard it several times, and that was also one of our hypotheses when we said we need to not just install the system, like everybody installs the system, but figure out how to maintain it. It's not easy because it does cost a little money to visit and maintain the system. We subsidize that. I won't say subsidize. We have technicians who are employed by the installations across the company, right? So they're doing these school installations. So the maintenance team is already there, and giving low cost maintenance to schools it's a bit of a marketing sort of thing, right? Because if you put a system in a school and it doesn't work, then it doesn't look good, whether or not it's your fault or not. So that's why we keep following up with these, because it's good to put it in there. It's good to see an initial impact in year 1, but it's better to see that same impact in year 5, year 10. So we're trying to build a system to do that. We're not completely there yet, but our commitment is to be at minimum phoning all these schools, but slowly build a local network of people.
And so, I think what's really interesting there is that comment caught you by surprise as well. And I think that's sometimes the case when you're working in any country, and we come back to being Nepal, where there is, because of the extraordinary history and details of those histories, there's a lot of things that happen when you're in Nepal that you see, and you ask a Nepali about it, and often they don't know because it's just so obvious. And then often they do know and they explain it to you, but it's something where it's you phone up a head teacher and they just say, oh yeah, attendance has gone up, and you're like, well, I installed a water system, what about, you know, but that's something that's stated almost like an obvious thing. Well, of course attendance have gone up because of the water, and it's something that I guess surprises us.
And I think to a degree it's also the fact that, I mean, some kids are walking an hour or two to get to a school, right? So if you walk an hour or two in one direction, there's a school. You walk an hour or two in another direction, there's probably a school, right? So some students maybe decided to go to the school with the water filter. Yeah, that's also, I believe, there. I think in that district, most of the schools will have water filters fairly soon, because there's been a massive concentration of work there after the earthquake, because it was so hard. I think we've partnered with organizations, including yours. We've done almost 40 systems in schools in that district alone. So that is it is a growth thing, and I think it's good to see more and more schools adopting clean water and wanting it. So our thinking is that in the future, governments do have budgets to pay for these. Local governments do. They're supposed to spend a certain percentage every year on water, in theory. So ideally, what we want to do is keep working in these schools and keep contact in certain areas, so that tomorrow, a year or so down the line, the local government's hitting the end of the fiscal year, and they're like, what should we spend our money on? Because governments always have money to spend. It's kind of weird, but it's very true in Nepal, which is why you see all those bulldozed roads going up in the middle of the rainy season. So instead of bulldozing a road that's going to wash away in the rain, they can be like, hey, 5 out of 5 of the neighboring schools all have clean water, and the attendance is increased and the kids like it, etc. There's another 2 schools, let's do it, sort of thing. Like, that's our hope, our theory. And that's one reason we want to, and as a private company, are flexible to, without requiring additional significant budgets, is continue to stay in touch with these schools. It's like you buy a car and the car dealer is still calling you 100,000 miles and donating a car just in case you need service. We kind of want to be like that, I think, even for government schools and low-income households as well. That's our goal eventually. I think some places where organizations buy filters and just drop them off, it's a little hard to bridge that gap. But where we sell the filters or we can be involved, we're building a system of follow-up. Even the simple $20 filter that we use in your races, that's the same one, smaller version we give to households, right? It's a very good filter, European standard, but it's also very cost effective. But we intend to stay engaged, even for a little tiny product, with the consumer into perpetuity. It is a revenue source for us, but if they're still buying replacement parts 3 years down the line, which are very, very affordable, it's less than 50 cents a month, right? If they're still doing that, then we know the impact is there. So that's the kind of reliability we as a company, and that's why we chose to be a company instead of a nonprofit. And
so when it comes to, I mean, I think, again, a lot of people don't realize, everyone knows of Nepal from the Himalayas, and therefore it becomes fairly obvious that the topography is hilly. I don't think anyone realizes, certainly who come on our trips, until they're on that road up to Kathmandu or next year up to Batase, just how challenging it is to move around Nepal. How, when you know that the most rural, the most remote communities can often be the ones that need your support from Smart Pani where that's an area where, how on earth do you begin to, I guess, market what you're doing and raise awareness and build that trust that people will invest into Smart Pani within their communities? How do you do that from a practical perspective as much as anything else?
So it's about having a presence and relationships, I think, and building their trust. So we always do a program at the school as well around behavior change and proper hand washing, etc. Right now, we've focused on communities where we have networks. Probably 14 of my staff are from rural areas, fairly remote rural areas, because they're technical school of background. So we've actually been, some of their areas, going back into those communities because they already have a relationship. We did 8 around one, and that's easy because then they just call. And that's what we kind of want to do. So as we expand, we want to work with local NGOs on the ground, but then also local potential women entrepreneurs to be the liaison in the community. Us as a whole, like be our distributor, for example, like households and everything, and build that trust that way. So we are working in somewhat remote areas, but we're patching it like slowly. So, 1-day drive from an urban center, 2-day drive from an urban center. We don't want to immediately jump to the 3-day drive from an urban center school right now, because if we fail, then it doesn't work. So as long as we can get there, and we're getting there. I think our model is doing well. I mean, we've done 120 plus schools in rural areas in the past 4 years now, all with this model. I mean, some of them are international nonprofits who are working in these areas who come to us, and they come to us because of our systematic approach. So we've done quite a few of that, but we've also done a lot where we've partnered with organizations like Impact, or companies like Dopper, which is a water bottle company in the Netherlands, who promote durable water bottles instead of single-use plastic, and then take a percentage of their profit to do clean water in Nepal. So we're one of their partners. So we've done 25 schools with them. And we provide maintenance and wash education in almost all those schools. There are a couple schools where actually ENFO's doing the wash education because it's under a different project. They needed fund hardware. So we did that. And now we're working with them to work with the local government to ensure that the system is maintained ideally. And that's kind of how we want to build as we grow. So we're now, I think, we have a presence with our systems within 21 of maybe even 25 of 75 districts in Nepal now. So we're hoping to keep growing. Okay.
And I'm going to ask you this in a 2-part question, because most people have asked from a 1-part question. But if you, when it comes to water, and I guess within that concept of Global Goal 6, clean water and sanitation, if there was one thing, if you could have one wish in Nepal for tackling that problem and making Nepal a standard bearer for that SDG, what would be the one thing that you would catalyze change on an exponential change? What's the one thing you would wish for?
I wish, this is tricky and it's going to sound a little money-minded, but it's not. People think water should be free. And maybe the water itself coming out of the pipe for your basic needs should be free-ish, right? But how do you pay for the pipe maintenance, the pumping if that's required, the filter maintenance if that's required? And I think it's been pushed in Nepal so long through the community sort of thing that communities maintain the system. It's low cost. The cost that they raise each month from the household is like less than 0.5% of their monthly income. And it doesn't even cover the cost of the system, which means systems are breaking down again and again and again. And communities are becoming disillusioned with it. And as a result, not even willing to pay the 50 rupees a month for it. And I wish that there would be some large scale effort to change that. And I'm not saying increase the price by a lot, but figure out how to say maintenance is important. Let's build that in from the very beginning. Here's the financial plan. This is transparently what you're going to get. If you contribute it, here's the person. And there are efforts now. I just hope those efforts go on scale quickly, because right now the amount that people are paying for water don't even factor in what treatment would be or what anything. And it's not even, it's so tiny that it's not even a burden. It wouldn't even be a burden on the poorest family. And you can always subsidize the poorest anyway. But if you can't, if the system doesn't function, then it's pointless, right? If the system breaks because you can't pay for a pipe, what's the point of putting it in the first place? What's the point of it being free or cheap? I'm not saying that. It shouldn't be expensive either. And you should have, whatever you're charging for water, people should get the value for it. Right?
Yeah.
So if people are paying 50 rupees a month and the system's breaking all the time because that 50 rupees a month can't pay for the maintenance, then they're not even getting the 50 rupee value.
Yeah.
It's a paradox.
And just to translate that, 50 rupees is about 50, is almost exactly 50 cents. If
yeah, a little less.
Yeah. So I'm not sure of the exchange rates at the moment. Now that this is my first November in five years where I'm not in Nepal for it. So
120.
Okay.
Yeah. 120.
Okay. So yeah, a little less. And translating that, because this is something that has definitely come up across the world in terms of the impact races. With, our current thing in Jordan, obviously Jordan being the second most water scarce country on earth. I guess I wanted your thoughts on it from a macro global level as well. So it's the same question, the one wish, but in terms of how we can use our water resources, or what we need to be more sustainable from a water perspective, what would your one wish be? What would the one catalyzer be?
Proper investment in the water resource to consider the long term, right? Especially in a water scarce country like Jordan, or even in certain desert areas in the United States, right? It's from those water sources might not be renewable to a scale. So what you put in at the beginning, water, it's an asset. It literally fuels a whole society. Without water, we're nothing. So it needs to be treated, yes, as a human right, to your minimum basic need, but also as an asset that we properly value. And no, I'm not saying we should privatize water. And there's a wealthy UK private company, Severn Trent, that got kicked out of Nepal many years ago, and I completely agree with that, because in the UK they were known for leaky pipes. So in a country with leaky pipes, why would you want them there, right? But it does need to be driven by quality. In the end, it's not about making sure it's as cheap as possible for everybody. It's about making sure it's affordable. It's not a burden. People are getting the value, but it's long term, and that includes what comes out the pipe afterwards as well. If we're polluting the water source upstream, then downstream it's going to be more expensive as well. So we need to think of the whole ecosystem of water when we're considering the costs of water and how it goes. And I think that global conversation needs to shift a lot on that still.
Absolutely. Yes. And I think there's everything from there's those elements where it's about land management, and you said it right at the top of the program is like, how are we using water within agriculture? How can we be more efficient with water in agriculture? What are the different ways that we can connect with land management to use less? If agriculture is our biggest usage of water, yes, it's important that we turn off the tap whilst brushing our teeth. All of these small things add up, but we need to be looking at where we're spending our water and see it as a case that we are investing our water in this. This is our resource. This is what we're investing into.
I mean, the shirt you wear, for example, the amount of embedded water in this shirt is more than you use in several months in your house. And then on top of that, it's also the quality of material, the dyes being used, especially if your shirt's being produced in a developing country. Chances are the wastewater standards are not enforced. They exist. Nepal has pretty stringent wastewater standards. But that means that this blue dye is going out the pipe, which means it's going down the stream. You see rice paddies that are purple. So that part is, and that's something that needs to come from responsible production in the UK or the US or wherever. It's not just about getting the cheap labor, everything like that, which is another discussion we shouldn't not have. That's horrifying as well. But there's a lot of analysis about how hyper growth it's going to lead to a lot of cleanup 10 years down the line that we have to do, and that is never factored into the price of anything. And whether it's meat consumption as well. I'm a meat eater. I do believe that not the whole world needs to be a vegetarian, but the quality of meat you consume, what goes into it, how much water is embedded into it, the frequency. Are you consuming industrial meat that gets fed tons and tons of corn and soy, or something that maybe requires less water and restores the soils and grazes over grasslands that would be grasslands anyway? Then it's not taking land away, so your embedded water is a bit less. Somebody might yell at me because it's not always true when you compare grass-fed and conventional, but it is true for the proper grass-fed. So, but you have to think of water beyond a lot of things, and like the quality, especially even electronics, like phones. Don't throw away your iPhone every year, or make sure you give it back to Apple to recycle, because there's a water impact there. There was an Al Jazeera episode specifically on Apple and Foxconn, which I think is unfair because Apple actually does a lot more than the other phone companies, and they should have actually been looking at some of the other ones too. But the water that goes in, it goes through a ton of chemicals, and then if it's not treated when it comes out, it's in the river. And a lot of those are somewhat forever chemicals, which means they're very hard to remove. And that's part of the global, I think.
So you've got this extraordinary, what you've done. You've touched on agriculture. You've touched on fashion and what we wear. You've touched on personal behaviors. You've touched there on electronics. So there's this element, as you said, water just runs through all of these things.
Yes.
And not only is it about the resource and we're investing it, but it's also how we're treating it, how we're looking after it. Because some of the things you said, definitely that last thing around the recycling of phones, and that's something I've never heard before.
Yeah. Not around the recycling, around the production of phones, right?
Okay.
The recycling of phones is horrible unless you send it. Apple and a few others do collect them and actually do properly take them apart. But when it ends up in the municipal system, it doesn't always, and that's why the whole, I try to make a phone last 4 years, or a laptop last 5 years, or whatever, and I have a compostable phone case that lasted 3 years, and it's going to go into compost because I have a plastic one that breaks every year. Those plastic ones, I've had the best, and they break. I've had a life-proof case. Be extraordinarily durable. Sorry, life-proof. Broken a year. And I mean, it's about thinking holistically, and water is always somewhat forgotten. There are examples where the quote more sustainable way uses a lot more water. Like, for example, plastic bags versus cloth bags. The amount of water used in a cloth bag is it's undescribably more. But then what happens to this when it goes through and ends up in the ocean? There's a balance, a need, and that's what people need to think a little bit more. I think water is, it's a very important resource that is entering the discussion, but maybe not as much as it should.
Yeah. And I think, part of what we've always tried to do with the races and what fires me up, and particularly with what we're trying to do by having more of these conversations, is raise that consciousness. We all have an impact, no matter what. We can't live on Earth without creating a footprint. And it's really, the more conscious that we can be, the more aware we can be in our decision making, in our consumption habits, in our conversations, we give ourselves the opportunity to as an individual, be leaving the world a better place. And it's not a perfect science, and something you change here can have a knock-on effect there. As you said, cloth bags, plastic bags, this seems the solution, but there's a whole different load of things that comes with it. But let's not just quietly go through life and just be like, well, that's just the way it is. Let's have these discussions. Let's be open about it. And we're sort of supposed to be coming into land here, but you mentioned Al Jazeera there. And the reason I pick up on that is, obviously, it's been quite a crazy month for Americans and for the world in watching what has been happening in America this November with the elections. And it brings me back to this thing that I've been getting a bit fired up about, which is understanding where we generate our information from. Where do we receive our information from? And I watched a number of different news sources throughout the US election, and the lack of do I want to say integrity? I don't know whether I think integrity, the lack of integrity between all of the channels, the lack of a consistent message that was like, we've got to tell this story, almost like we've got to paint this picture. Al Jazeera always seems to me to step slightly aside from that. It always seems to me to be looking and focusing more on interviewing with academics rather than politicians. It always seems to be presenting the news from the world and not just the insular little worlds that we often find ourselves cocooned in. Where do you, what are the resources you use in order to have a really open mind towards what's happening and to engage in that discussion in a conscious way?
I mean, I do follow the news. I am on Twitter way too much. I don't know why. But I like to dig down and have a balanced perspective and follow the experts, and then read articles and books and academics and, watch things that organizations like Al Jazeera. And I actually think BBC does a decent job as well on some of these topics. CNN does as well. I think their mainstream news, BBC America, definitely biased, CNN biased, Fox, good God, etc. Right? Actually, it was kind of funny. Fox called some of the key states for Biden or any of the other ones do. All the ones that he always rages on as fake news wouldn't call those states, and Fox did.
It seemed quite deliberate from I was watching CNN at the time, and it was like the reason, it felt like it was a deliberate decision. We're not going to call states for Biden until Fox does, because and I thought that was a really interesting thing to play out, right?
It took 3 days for them to call Arizona.
Yeah.
3 days after Fox.
Fascinating. Like just being really focused on, we're not going to do that because we're aware, we're conscious of the fact that we're a liberal station.
And I think Fox had their pulse. Exactly. That was it. They're conscious that Trump will really go after them, right? The Republicans will really go after them. And they also ran the math, and I ran the math. I was actually getting quite scared of Arizona because Trump was keeping a certain pace that he could have actually won it. That pace tailed off in the end, and he lost it by more than I was actually expecting. But Fox had their pulse on the ground a bit more in Arizona with Republicans, probably is my guess. So I think they understood the phases of ballots just a little bit better, and I think they probably accurately predicted that gap closing to peter off, unlike in other states where it would explode for Biden, right? But I think the presence of the mainstream media with your Twitter, with your Facebook, the short text, the headlines, they miss, and nobody ever reads them. Fortunately, now Twitter says, have you read the article before retweeting it, which is kind of funny. It's good. Big people just ignore it and retweet it anyway.
Yeah.
But that short bit consumption leads to a lot of controversy because people didn't actually read the article. Okay, how many times the headline, everybody's raging about the headline. Even your more respected people, most avoid that. I mean, excluding academic, more respected political analysts are raging about the headlines. And in the third paragraph of the article is something else. And that's something I always consciously, around environmental topics, political topics, whatever it is, just go down into the article and also read the source papers. Listen to, medium, not long form 2-hour podcasts, but 1 hour podcasts with experts wherever you You can. And go
For
deep.
an hour and a half podcast as this has been so far. Hour and a half, I think, is exactly the right length for a podcast.
I'm thinking it's going to go another 15 minutes, maybe an hour 45.
Yeah, in fact, 2 hours if you respect the two people on it. If you don't, then you haven't got this long into the podcast to hear us say this. So,
oh no, there's some really good ones that are 2 hours long.
The one that I get inspired about when it comes to creating this actually is Ezra Klein on Vox Media, and you know, if he needs to go for 3 hours, he'll go for 3 hours if that's what it takes to cover the topics available. And that was something that really inspired me in terms of doing more of these talks, is that there's actually not a lot in the impact, whether that's charity, whether that's social business, there's not a lot of or content out there, particularly in the podcast world, on that. And I thought, let's do this, and let's have this opportunity to have discussions which, as I said, when we and the reason we're both drinking beers, we would normally have you know, in a Kathmandu bar over some beers and have those kind of conversations, because I think in the last 5 years, it's those conversations that have left the greatest impression, have resourced me best, and have got my understanding, whether it's a country or a topic. Or I remember being out in Kenya during the 2017 elections, which got overturned by the Supreme Court and rerun. And it was a challenging time to be trying to put on a race during a 6-week period where the country didn't know who their president was and what was going to happen next. And best yeah, sorry about it. Too close to home. But you know, the best element of that was sitting down, and it was actually one chap that I was spending a lot of time with called David, and we would just chat and over a whiskey, and it helped me put into context the fact that we're talking about a democracy that was only 50 years old, and democracy wasn't a form of government that was chosen by Kenyans at time of independence. It was a form of government that was a fairly obvious thing that they had to do. And so once you put in centuries of tribal politics that had worked, you dump a colonial period on top, and then you pull the colonial period away, and it's like, well, democracy. Of course, it's a scary time, 50 years into democracy. And if we look back at the histories of the UK, of the US, yes, there have been internal conflicts, and in the early days of democracy. And obviously there are less violent at the moment, internal conflicts on both sides of the Atlantic, and so it's through those conversations that we're not in business mode, so to speak, but that's where you start to really understand topics and nations and see things from a bigger picture. So that's, I guess, what we were trying to do with this series, was the deeper dive, see where it goes, and not put a time limit on it, and not put that, because if it's interesting, then it's interesting to the listener, and if it's interesting to us, then, you know, I don't know how, it's pretty late here in the UK, but I'm good to go.
Yeah, I mean, exactly. Like, I think we're so used to snippet sort of media now, and I think you do need to dig into something deeper. We got 15, 20 minutes podcast isn't enough. I mean, it's got to be 35, 55, even the 2-hour ones, 2.5-hour ones. It was an excellent one with Andrew Yang and Anand Giridharadas on the negatives of philanthropy. Right? He's the winner-take-all author, and I'm good at pronouncing South Asian names, but I have to keep reading because it has an extra syllable or two in it that I miss sometimes. So hopefully I got it that time. But I loved his concept, and I like Andrew Yang as well. And I think the whole thing about how the people who are doing the philanthropy are the ones creating the problem as well, in a very large case of large corporate philanthropy. And I think that's something we, even as individuals, need to think about as well. And I think that, you know, I just spent a whole time talking about individual action with water, but the reality is that with water and with climate change, you can count, it's under 100 companies around the world who are causing the vast majority of the impacts in both. And there's only so much we can do as individuals with our purchase and lifestyle decisions. We should continue doing this. There was an excellent podcast called The Matter of Degrees. It's run by Dr. Leah Stokes and Dr. Catherine Wilkinson. They're both really respected climate, more social scientists actually. One runs Drawdown, and the other is studies the policies of inaction, basically. Reading an excellent book by her. But they had this whole thing outlining individual action is good and we should do it. And they were talking about how they had solar, electric cars, etc. In reality, it's actually the political part that we should be more focused on. Right now, Biden is being held a bit accountable on his cabinet picks, and their ties to oil. One may be African American, whose ties to oil. So there's a huge outcry. And I think we need to be very aware of that, because a lot of the information being fed to us isn't true. And it's because of these companies. Like, for example, solar power on a roof in the United States can give you a 4 to 5% return on investment without the federal incentives. Nobody knows that. I mean, what else can you get a 4 to 5% ROI on an asset that's safe and it's on your roof? That excludes the increase in home value, etc. Right? And there are ways for renters to also get that by buying into solar gardens, community solar gardens. They can cut their electricity bill by 5 to 10% just by doing that from day one. And this information, your neighbor doesn't know. And they're going, oh, solar, it's so expensive. And it's because that's what's being fed. And they're like, a Green New Deal, oh, it's a liberal, how are we going to pay for it? 40% of the households give them financing. Just start, and I mean, there are a lot of other issues, storage and intermittency and all these things, but there are solutions. I mean, that's what this book Drawdown is, a book of 100 solutions to climate change that will not only solve it, but drawing back the emissions back down. And it's very interesting. It talks about water-related solutions. It talks about
and I think also people miss the point of to some degree in terms of when that government spending goes into green that's money that goes into the pocket of the people who are the workers who are putting the infrastructure together. It's investment into the country. It's not just money that just gets burnt. It is money that, I mean, I'm sure there's money wastage, but that money wastage is still going into the system, which is what government spending is there for. Is to build our infrastructures, to give better quality of life, but also to fuel the economy. And at a time now, if you fuel that economy, there's a lot of logic. Again, it goes back to that media element of if we just focus on the headline, you see $2 trillion, whatever it is that the numbers are being thrown around. And that just seems like, well, obviously that's not possible. But when you put it in the scale of how much is already being spent and how much is spent on unsustainable infrastructure and has been spent previously on unsustainable infrastructure, it's literally just spending it differently and investing that into the economy. And I think that communication, and I think that the progressive left do a pretty poor job of communicating the facts, because the facts are very strongly in favor of the progressive left at times, and yet there seems this communication issue with that messaging, and it's far easier to cry foul and to cry to point out big figures and say how are you going to, without looking at what the facts are.
No, and I think that's exactly, like, the thing is that I was reading, to solve these problems, we have to focus on the solutions, right? And that's why I started a business to begin with. And even here, I'm debating of starting something here as well, a little bit separate. I'm kind of spending some time on that because I truly believe that a lot of these solutions to these problems will create new industry, new economic, beyond what people think they will. And it will provide return on investment to anybody who's, as I was talking about, smart planning in Nepal, like for a certain chunk of the population in Kathmandu, you pay back the system in 2.5 years. Your internal rate of return on something that pays back in 2.5 years, that's insane. You're doubling your money in 5 years. Like, that's a 20% IRR. Where are you getting a 20% IRR? There's a system on your roof. And it's the same with the solar system. It's the same with a lot of other systems.
Yeah.
We don't know these things. And we're getting, and don't get me wrong, climate change, the urgency of the problem is important. But they always talk about how expensive, one side talks about how expensive and how unsustainable how it is. And they even go into how renewables have waste, or lithium mines have problems. Yes, they do. Those do need to be fixed. And tomorrow, 30 plus years down the line, a solar panel will need to be replaced. Right? But in 30 years, we can develop a recycling technology, ideally. But nobody talks about the fact that those problems are all worse than fossil fuel. There are subsidies that are both open subsidies and subsidies that we can't even quantify. And then tomorrow you plug a well and it leaks methane, blows up, or methane is one of the fastest drivers. There's so many plugged wells that are leaking methane. Or the oil spills you have every other year. Who's paying to clean that up? Yes, the companies are paying. I mean, in the US, we have a whole thing called Superfund, cleaning up old mines and oil spills and industries and things like that who have left. And a big chunk of that is paid for by the government. That is a subsidy. You're cleaning up after a dirty industry. It's a subsidy. But people miss that part. I mean, if 10 years down the line, we have a huge amount of solar waste, and wind has a huge waste problem. Wind has a massive waste problem. Waste that is polluting and toxic and not dealt with, there should be activism to deal with that. But right now, you're talking about 30-year lifespan, and we don't know that. So every argument that's being put out there has a counter argument that's not being heard as well, because these big companies are lobbying against it, and they have the perfect audience, people who want small government.
Yeah. And so when it comes to the fight, and this is a really important question at the moment, which is when you look at we've had this pretty crazy year. There's a lot of things that are worrying in the world, and in fairness, there has always been, if you go back generations, people were always worried about something. But we always want to sort of focus in on, and I think this is going to be quite easy because every time I meet with you, you always seem happy and positive and energized. Even at the end of races, you're still smiling. What makes you optimistic in a world where some of the stuff we talked about here, we ourselves have fallen into the classic cliches of how we describe certain things in the classic narrative. So what makes you optimistic and positive about the future of humanity?
I do believe that we are an innovative species who can work our way out of these problems. And I do believe that we will be a society that grows and becomes more and more modern. I don't believe in the theory of endless economic growth. I think that is a flawed theory. I do believe that we need improvement in markets and things. But what does encourage me is that there is a consciousness among our generation, and good God, I can't believe I'm saying this, the generation younger than us. I can't believe I'm that age now. But the 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 25-year-olds who are actively holding the corporations to account, and they're not getting bought out, and they're starting to create alternative narratives. You're seeing more and more companies actually do things that address the whole part of the problem because they've been pressured into it by society. And I am optimistic that this movement, combined with a desire among this generation to start their own new thing, will lead to the change we need. I do believe that social media can be a net positive to help spread these changes. Is it right now? I won't get into that debate or discussion. But I believe that just seeing the innovation, whether it's in Nepal, whether it's in the US, I'm encouraged by everything I see. A lot of things I see when I come back here, a lot of things I hear about from Europe as well. I think we have a problem-solving generation that's going to run the world in the next couple of years, and I think we will solve these problems, and we will become a equitable, sustainable society once we break those old narratives that aren't true reality if you actually look at the facts.
Amazing. Thank you, Tyler, for taking the time to chat. I feel like we're going to have a follow-up later in the year and get into some of those other topics that we've kind of touched upon, most notably the sustainability of beer. That's a key one that we need to discuss. But thanks so much, for all the support that you've given me personally and teaching me more about Nepal. Which is still the most extraordinary and brilliant country but most challenging every single year. No matter how many times we go back there and do this race, that country always presents a new challenge. So how you manage to continue to be evolving with the country as Nepal takes amazing steps forward in so many different areas for the last 13 years, but also your support in terms of making sure the water around the race course is out in time and all of these things. You're the only race that I do water filtration out on the course with. And that's I would never touch it, but I don't touch upon it in any other country because it's a terrible idea in some ways, but it manages to work because of your team. And if it wasn't for your team, we wouldn't have that out on the course for sure. So massively grateful for that. And thank you so much for taking this time.
Of course. I'm always happy to talk, and I like what you guys do. I think you've had a good impact. I look forward to seeing you move to a new community and seeing what the team can do there as well.
Yes, yeah, I know that you're keen to.
I've not actually been there.
Have you not?
Don't think so. No, I for some reason I've been out of town during Jimmy's races. Well, during last year, this year obviously didn't happen, and the year before that, I wasn't running at the level to do.
Well, when I first met you, you were steadfastly against running. So I feel like this is a huge step at the last 5 years, seeing your transition from a mountain biker to a hardened runner.
Mind you, I was a runner before I was a mountain biker. I used to run all long distance races in high school, and then I got a mountain bike in college. I did both in college, and then I went to Nepal, and I did run. I actually started Smart Funny on a run with the general manager of the Summit Hotel. He's a Dutch guy. We used to run at lunch every so often. I signed up for the Kathmandu half marathon with my boss at WFP and a few others, and we ran a lot. And this guy ran with us. He's a crazy ultra runner. Jimmy knows him. I think he's the guy who started Annapurna, helped start Annapurna beyond Richard Ball. His name's Roger. And he's the one who gave me that opportunity to consult for the Summit Hotel, which was the final kick I needed to start Smart Funny. But then he left, and I stopped running at lunch, and I sprained my ankle badly in one of what was then Richard's trail races. I tend to sprain my ankles every couple of years. So I just stuck to biking only. But now I'm quite happy. I've not been on a bike in 2 months.
Yeah.
I miss a bike. I think Mia misses the bike more than I do.
Yeah.
She turns around and hightails full speed off after the mountain bikers in the opposite direction all the time on our runs. But that will change. I'm getting my bike next week, so I plan to do both. I think it's healthy. My ankles are starting to come back together and fuse in a single point. So got to break them up with biking a little bit.
But at least running. I didn't realize you started. I mean, I think that if I was ever asked what makes me optimistic, it's the fact that when runners go out and run together and talk as they run, great things happen. That always makes me optimistic. And I'm obviously very biased in that conversation, but so many amazing ideas come on a run, both within yourself, but also when you're out and you discuss and you chat as you run, and the bond that comes between runners. And certainly the races in Nepal that I've been involved in, the challenge and the difficulty and the gnarliness of the course means that Stina, for instance, who ran quite a lot of the race last year in Annapurna, where I had a disastrous day. She never looks at me the same way again after what we went through on that course together. But that bond is then there, and that always gives me reason to be optimistic. If people keep on running, then the world can be quite an amazing place to be.
I mean, it's the perfect combination of pace and adrenaline, right? I think I love hiking and trekking too, and I love biking. Biking is mostly too fast, right?
Yeah. And
hiking is, I don't know if you always get the endorphins that sometimes start the brain kickstarting.
No.
Whereas running is both. That's great.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm discussing a new business idea here with a guy that I got trained with quite a few times already. And,
literally in 5 years of being in the running industry full time, no one's ever come up with that point. That is a brilliant point. It's like the best of both worlds. I mean, yeah, we're going to call it a fact, but it's a logical fact. You know, as in it makes sense in a logical way. Whether it's true or not is irrelevant, but it's a logical fact.
Completely logical.
On that note, thank you, Tyler. Mia had to be in the phone call.
I think somebody delivered something at the door.
That's outstanding. Perfect timing. I think Mia, as always, whenever you meet up with Tyler, Mia's there, and she nearly always has the first and last word in the conversation. So It's great that she got the last word in this recording. And thanks so much, man.
All right. Thanks. Take care.